Hello and welcome to Raw Chatter. It is Vicky Midwood, your host here, the Addiction Eliminator, health, nutrition and lifestyle coach. And I want to say thank you for joining me. If you have not yet subscribed, can I ask you to please do that? If it's on Spotify that you're listening to the podcast, or if you're watching me on YouTube, because if you do subscribe, it means that we're going to get this content out to more people who may really benefit from hearing what I have to share. So I am flying solo again today, folks. And if you've looked at the title of this one, you may be like, oh, yeah, I do swear. Yeah, but basically, this is the time of year when everything is growing and changing. It's spring. It's an amazing time of year. I always think that this is a much more sensible time of year for us to be thinking about making New Year's resolutions, intentions, whatever the word you choose to use. But it's the ideal time for change. Why? Because we've got more daylight. We generally have more sunlight. And it's a little bit warmer, which means that as human beings, it taps in to working our circadian rhythm. Our cellular health is functioning much, much better than it does in winter. And in general, we tend to get outside more. We start to feel like we can do things that back in the wintertime, when it was really freezing cold and very, very dark, we just didn't want to do. So this is the time to thrive. And if you've seen from the title there, I've put fuck survival, let's thrive, because I think that now is the time for us to say, do you know what? Make 2023 the year that I get free from hanging on to all of the crap that is keeping me stuck in behaviors, thought patterns, habits that I really don't want to keep a hold of any longer, but I'm scared to let them go. Right. And this is the thing, because what we know is that fear is the one thing that stops us from doing what we, in inverted commas, know on an intellectual level that we need to do, because we're scared of how it's going to make us feel. Right. And if we've had a go at changing our behavior patterns and habits in the past, you'll know that the feeling that you get is discomfort. It doesn't feel great when you're doing something different to what your body, your brain, and your mind are used to doing. And that is purely and simply because we have fired and wired thought patterns and behaviors together. And your brain now thinks that you need to keep on doing those to survive. So I'm going to go a little bit into the kind of the reptile brain and the survival mechanism. But I shared a post on social media and I think it's really powerful. And I want to just quote it to you here, because bear this in mind when you're listening to what I have to say. Fear is an invitation to get curious, right? And curiosity is the C in my core principles to you getting a fabulous freedom. So we need to get curious. We need to be open-minded to allowing ourselves to see just what is possible for us. Because I know through experience for myself and working with other clients that every single human being is capable of a lot more than they give themselves credit to believe that they're capable of. And it's usually because their beliefs have been quashed by other people. Right. So just know that when you are feeling discomfort, it just means that more is possible. More is available to you. And you are right where you need to be. Nothing that we do that's new or different feels comfortable to start with. And I don't care what it is, right? Anything at all. When it's new, it feels weird. Weird's a good word, right? Sometimes I like to use the word weird rather than uncomfortable, because somehow weird feels a little bit more okay and more handleable, if that's a word. Well, it is now, right? Because discomfort is the way for you to break through and to actually get to the other side and let go of hanging on to the stuff that is keeping you feeling stuck, whether that's food related, whether it's alcohol related, whether it's repeating the same stories when you wake up that you always repeat of, oh, my back's aching, oh, I've got a headache, oh, I don't feel like I've had enough sleep. Whatever it is that you do on a habitual basis, on a daily basis, without conscious thought, this is the stuff that's keeping you right where you're at. This is the stuff that got you to being right where you are now. Every single one of us, me included, is where they are now because of the decisions, the habits, and the choices that we have made up until this very moment in time. So if I look at moaning about why is my business perhaps not as busy as I'd like it to be in 2023, well, I need to look back at what I've been doing last year, the year before, the year before that, the year before that, in the last 2 months, right? Because I have to take responsibility that I am where I am because of the choices that I made and the habits that I've created, right? And if I'm not happy with where I am, well, I need to change it. And if I want to thrive, that means I need to push through the fear, because fear is just a story in my head based upon the past or based upon a future that's not yet happened, but my brain is making up stories that are based upon what it knows, which is things in the past or that it's seen other people do, forgetting that I am not other people and their business and their health and their lifestyle is not mine. And this is the thing that we need to remind ourselves of. We are all individuals. There is no one size fits all. There is no one program. There is no one silver bullet or quick fix. There is no one thing that caused you to be right where you're at now. There never is one thing. And if there never is one thing that's the cause, why do we insist on looking for one thing that's going to be the solution? It can't possibly be. There's going to be multiple things that need to be done simultaneously, because there were multiple things that occurred simultaneously for you to be where you are now. Now, what we need to understand a little bit about is the brain and how it functions. Ultimately, the oldest part of the brain, the reptile part of your brain, the bit that's the kind of from the brain stem and upwards, is the thing that keeps us alive. What's really important to recognize is that the brain is not just kind of sat in your headspace on its own, right? Just in a bubble. It's connected. It's connected to your body by an incredible system of nerves. And this nervous system and your brain and every single organ and every single cell in your body talk to each other. Okay, so this is why I'm so strong on the idea that we need to stop separating mental health from physical health when we're talking about actual how we are behaving, thinking, and feeling, because everything is interconnected. And if we try and chop ourselves off at the head and just say, well, that's all mental health stuff, and we don't look at what is going on in terms of physical feelings and sensations that we are being driven by our nervous system from external sources, from things like temperature, the weather, which I've already mentioned, but what we put internally in terms of medication and drugs and supplementation and food and alcohol and all liquids, basically. Everything externally and what we ingest is going to affect how our brain functions, is going to affect our mood, it's going to affect our physical health, and our physical health affects our mental health. Does our mental health affect our physical health? Yes, it does. So we can't separate them. It's all health. And what your brain thinks that you require to survive are the habits that you have created. So when we find it's a challenge, or people say changing habits is hard, it's not hard. It's just that it feels uncomfortable, right? And if you choose to put a label on uncomfortable as hard, well, think about the associations that we have with words. And this is why language is so powerfully important, and why I cover and talk a lot about the words that we choose to use, because they make a massive difference. If I say to you that fear is just a false evidence appearing real, which you've probably heard a million times, and I personally don't like that particular acronym of it, but that is essentially what it is. It's not even true, right? We get scared about stuff because we don't know what the outcome's going to be, and that is where we're talking about the survival mechanism, because your brain says, don't do that. We've not done it before. We don't know what the outcome's going to be, and you might die. Because the primal part of our brain, the part that is linked to your survival, and that is the main part of the primal part of your brain, is to just keep you alive. And that means you need to have enough water, you need to have enough food so that you don't die. And ideally, you need to look for a mate so that you can procreate and keep the species going. That's pretty much it. That's pretty much, on a base level, our survival mechanism. And so everything that we do and everything, the habits that we've created to help us to be able to do those things, our brain thinks are necessary to our survival. And anything that's different to that is a threat. And a threat to the oldest part of the brain means death, right? And I know that sounds extreme, but it's true. Threat equals death. Now, if we switch the word stress, which we use a lot these days, even when we're not necessarily actually physically stressed, we're maybe just a little bit overwhelmed with a lot of thoughts, which are not necessarily causing a stress response, but they might be. But when we talk about stress, what we're often talking about is something that your brain thinks is a threat. So when we're getting anxious about something, when we're getting stressed, when we're overthinking, when we're jumping ahead and what ifing all of the time, we're creating and making up stories in our head. And so what the brain says, don't do that. Don't do that, because we don't know what the outcome's going to be. And because you're toying with so many different possible outcomes, the brain says, do you know what? Just stick to what you know. Stick to what you know, because that way we can survive and all will be well. Even if the thing that you are doing is not actually helping you to feel great, is actually detrimental to your health, your brain says, don't worry about that side of it, right? We know it, so it's comfortable, so we'll survive and all will be fine. It kind of makes sense until you recognize that that is not what happens, especially when we're talking about eating a lot of the wrong type of foods, when we're talking about us having issues around alcohol dependence or medication, whether it's actual prescription drugs or whether it's over-the-counter drugs. They are going to, in the long term, have consequences. And consequences on our health, which your reptile brain could not possibly foresee. And actually, neither could you. Why? Well, because, as I've said already, we're all individual. So we're all going to be affected differently. But again, your brain, in that respect, the human brain, whether we're talking about somebody who's got ADHD or any other issues with brain function, that reptile, that primal part of the brain, the only thing that it's interested in is keeping you alive. And that means keeping you safe. And safe normally means comfortable and familiar. And that is why we find that it's a struggle to let go of doing the stuff that we have, in inverted commas, always done. But here's the thing. A lot of the stuff that you've always done, you decided to do them yourself. Now, we know that we decided to do them because we were looking for a specific outcome. And if we found it, yes. The problem is, well, the chances are that the second time you repeated that thing and were looking for the same outcome, it wasn't quite the same. Didn't feel quite as good. It didn't give you quite the sense of relief. And so that's when the search begins. And that's when we keep on hoping that if we just do it again, it might be different this time. And then we create this pattern where we do it again and we do it again. And then before we know it, we're doing it without even thinking about doing it. And it's not actually giving us what it initially did. It's not actually giving us the reason why we began doing that habit in the first place. But now we feel like we can't stop. And that's basically what addiction is. It's you feeling that you cannot possibly function without doing the thing that you really don't want to be doing. And what I want to share with you is fox survival, right? Because we can. What a lot of us don't recognize is that most of the stuff that we turn to, whether it's food or it's alcohol or whether it's drugs, whether we're talking about popping pills or whatever, what we're getting is a sense of release, a sense of relief, or a little bit of a dopamine hit or a high, or maybe all of those. Right? And when it comes to us getting a little bit of a dopamine hit, what we have to remember is whatever we ingest is going to give us a spike. Right, it's going to give us a quick influx of a response, and that usually means that receptors will light up and hormones, messengers will attach, or neurotransmitters will attach, and we will start to feel differently, and we will start to usually feel great for a short period of time. We get the effect. Now, we then, unfortunately, when there's a spike, there is then a trough, there is a dip, if you like. So we go up and we drop down. Now, for those of you who've got diabetes or any issues around blood glucose levels or cortisol, and you're monitoring your cortisol, you'll know that this is what happens. You get a rise, you get a dip, you get a rise, you get a dip. What people don't do, and this is where we've got to embrace the feeling of discomfort, because it won't last long if you can ride it out. If you can just sit with it and not buy into how awful I'm feeling, how terrible it is, how long will it last, if you can just let it pass. Because what will happen is, if you allow yourself to have the spike and the trough, the dopamine will come back up to its natural kind of baseline level. And it will, given enough time. But this is the physiological part of the science bit that perhaps nobody talks about when we're talking about addiction to certain substances. It takes time. Your body is an amazing adaptation machine. And if you've been to rehab, for example, or you've gone cold turkey, where you've actually stopped yourself from having the substance that you had become ridiculously addicted to the point that it was detrimental to your life and perhaps to other people's, you'll know that if you managed to ride it out for a month, it was still challenging. But for those who were successful and were able to keep it going for a year or longer, your dopamine response will have come back to normal because you've given it long enough. Now, it doesn't have to take that long. It depends on how long you have been utilizing that substance and how many receptors you have actually dialed down or switched off completely. But your body, and this is what I want you to embrace, your body is an amazing adaptation machine if you give it the building blocks for the neurotransmitters and for new cells, which means eating the right type of food, thinking the right kind of thoughts, using the right kind of language that's going to help you to adapt and to create a resurgence in those neurotransmitters that will now help you to get your baseline dopamine back to normal. And this is where we have got to say, fuck you to the survival mechanism in the brain that just goes, no, don't wait. Just do it now. Just do it now, then you'll feel better. Yes, you will. You know that. You've got experience of that. You've done it. You've done it thousands of times, if not millions of times. But then you're going to get the trough. And if you can ride out that trough and not keep repeating the same pattern, then you will begin to thrive. And the key is having strategies in place. The key is changing the language that you use in your own head so that we change the interpretation and the perception of what things mean. We change what we do in terms of associations and triggers. Right. So if you are, for example, somebody who always has to have biscuits with a cup of tea, don't try and cut out the biscuits, change your drink, because then you haven't got the association that goes with the thing that you think is the problem. And if we can cut out the trigger, because the cup of tea was the trigger to you having the biscuits were not the trigger, the tea was, right? We need to work out what your triggers are. And then you can switch and work on strategies that work for you. And this is exactly the stuff that I talk about in my Nourish Not Punish Masterclass. That masterclass is available free on my website. Just go to the Get Started page. Website is vickymidwood.com. It's that simple. And you can just jump on there and listen to some of this stuff. But what I don't talk about there is kind of the science behind what goes on with the survival mechanism thing. But listen to that. And then if you feel that you want to try and implement some of those things so that you can actually say, fuck you to the survival mechanism and start to thrive, then jump onto my workshop, because I'm running these workshops all the way through April, May, June, and into July. And it's 2 hours of you actually learning to do this stuff, learning to thrive and saying, fuck you to survive, because all we need to do is help you to reprogram your brain so that it now thinks your new habits and new patterns of behaviors are the ones that you need to keep on doing to survive. And that is how you get to thrive. And it's not as hard as you think. So take a little look over at my Get Started page on the website, jump onto Eventbrite. If you want to go straight into a workshop, you can, and check out the other events that I'm doing on Eventbrite, because I've got virtual workshops, so virtual retreats coming up, and also in-person retreats will be coming real soon. If you found this helpful, and I hope you have, please do leave a comment. If it's not necessarily been helpful for you, but you think that you know somebody who might find it helpful, I would love for you to pass it on to them. Remember, you only have one life, and as far as we know, we only have one life and one body. It's looking after you. Look after it. Take care of yourself. You do deserve it. It's time for you to thrive, not just survive. Thanks for listening. Have a good day.